All right, and we're live. This is MC1 Gamer bringing you another Unlocking Age of Sigmar. Well, today we have, yes, once again, Vince Venturella, who's going to be going over, I guess, something very close to his heart, Skaven. Thanks for joining us again, Vince.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, man. It's good to be back. It's good to be talking about the rats, the army truly closest to my heart. I've played them for 20 years, so...
Yeah, there's no one else that I would have do this other than you. I mean, maybe Skaven and AZ.
He has at least my equal in love for the Verminous Horde.
Exactly,
so
exactly. And he is actually started to get into Age of Sigmar. So I'm very happy to see that. So, and I've been watching some of his videos. So, and again, not only should we be plugging your channel, but I want to plug his as well because he's a longtime Skaven fan. All right, so we got more unlockings, more videos. More lists to go over. The format is 3 lists around 2,000 points with allies and without allies. We're going to look at Skaven, but let's first talk about Skaven.
Yep.
Because Skaven is a completely different beast. I have played Skaven a ton of times. I played Skaven back in 8th edition. I didn't play in any of the earlier editions. I don't think they even released when I first started playing. And I had a big gap in my tenure in Warhammer. But whenever I play them, from the very first time until fairly recently, every time is very tense because they do things that totally change the game, take you out of your element, and really put you on edge. And it's fun to play against, and I got to imagine it's fun to play. So why don't we, just for any of the newcomers, anybody who isn't really familiar with Age of Sigmar or familiar with Skaven in particular, why don't we give a little bit of an introduction to what it's like to play with and against Skaven?
Sure. So traditionally, like, you know, if you look back at the sort of nexus of Skaven and their origination, they're sort of the dark mirror of the old empire, right? The human empire. They have a lot of similar style troops and capabilities, a focus on technology and things like that. They classically were the under empire, right? They've always been a horde army, largely. They had wacky magic. And if I had to have one thing that defines Skaven, it would be a much higher risk reward tolerance than most other armies. So they have now in AOS and have always classically had the ability to do really wacky, crazy things that might be sort of more powerful than average, but that have horrible, crippling, destructive downsides to themselves, right? The point being that to the Skaven, life is cheap and they'll gladly throw like hundreds of slaves into a grinder if it means they have a slight chance of one thing working out better. So they, from a narrative perspective, they have a general disregard for life, including their own. They're a very like conniving, scheming race, classically led by the Council of 13, these sort of like dark, shadowy figures that are the heads of all the major clans, and then an open seat for the Horned Rat himself, and so on and so forth. Obviously, recently in Age of Sigmar, there's actually more ways to play them now than there ever were before. I would say traditionally there was, especially during 8th, there really was a sort of standardized way to play them that had to do with large blocks of slaves and stuff like that. And I'll actually call it the Skaven and AZ list because he's how I became familiar with that particular build. But large numbers and, you know, nothing too sensitive that could be taken out and so on and so forth. And going back farther, there's been shooting lists and stuff like that. But it's always been more or less one particular way to play at any given edition. Now they actually can run in a lot of different ways. They're still an easy horde army. That is certainly still true, but they don't have to be. They also have the ability to have some pretty elite troopers on the table that have some interesting capabilities. Now, don't mistake me, dear listeners and watchers. I'm not in any way saying that these are like the Stormcast or something, because, you know, Stormcast have this advantage of having really high saves and multi-wound models. It's a totally different ballgame. But they do have some interesting choices to have smaller forces where they power it into more elite choices. And you'll see some of those. So,
and there's that risk reward thing that you mentioned. One of the things I remember, I think this might have been even coined by either you or Skaven, where when it comes to the law of averages, when you have enough of these random things taking place, eventually they're going to come off in your favor, even if some of them are to your disadvantage. If something blows up in your face, if enough of these things are being thrown out, they're going to hurt your opponent more than yourself. And I think that was the theory. I forget who it was that kind of coined the phrase or the or the style of play. But I always felt like that was the case with Skaven, that some of this stuff might backlash against them, but they're going to just do a tremendous amount of damage to their opponent. And in Age of Sigmar specifically, they do there's a lot of options for mortal wounds, which is one of the key things you need to have for a successful army.
Oh yeah, they are definitely a mortal wound heavy army. That is for absolute sure. So let me make briefly for the more competitive people who are looking for like really hardcore competition. Here is what I would say. In general, Skaven are not going to be the way you want to go. Okay, what I mean is if you're inclined to podium at a tournament, Skaven in every incarnation ever have traditionally not frequently found their way to podiums, and there's a reason for that. The randomness and the ability for that army to blow up means that in an average sample size of 5 games, you're going to have, which is your standard sort of GT, you're going to have one game where enough things go wrong that your force implodes. Okay. Now you might have one that's just like slap. You just blow the opponent off the table because everything goes right. And we've all seen those. The problem is it's random enough. Like, especially now in AOS, most of your odds are 1 in 6 for things to go bad, right? Whenever you're triggering something, it's usually the 1 in 6 is the bad thing. Well, you play 5 games, 1 in 6, you do the math, okay? Like, it's pretty close that you're going to have a game that just works out terribly. Meaning, and realistically, you don't top place in a tournament with a loss, right? Like, you have to win 5 games. And it's very hard for Skaven to win 5 straight games traditionally. Now, that being said, Skaven are some of the most fun you'll ever have playing. Because of that, they're wild, they're wacky. You can do incredible, amazing things that other people will be jealous of and angry about. And it's a great way to lose friends. It's wonderful. We're going to talk about a list today that will make you immediately like have no more friends. So that should be a good time.
I remember the first time I ever played an Undead Army. That's back in, I think it was like 5th, maybe the latter part of 5th when it first was released. I was rolling through elves. I was rolling through dwarves, and I went up against a friend's Skaven list, and he destroyed my entire army, laid waste to it. Now, that's way back. Recently, it's been a little bit hit and miss. I agree with you. They're hysterical to play against. It's got that feel like the Orcs and Goblins, where a lot of mishaps can occur, but I agree with you also. And eventually there's going to be a series of cascading things that might go wrong. But you've mentioned this. There's got to be 1 or 2 events that really stick in your mind about things that have just gone absolutely wrong and then where they all went right. So can you share that just for the narrative folks out there, or for anybody who just wants to get a laugh?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll share a very recent story for things that have gone right. I think I mentioned this to you actually off the air after our last conversation. We were setting this up. So I was recently playing a game of AOS with my Skryre list. One of the ones we're actually going to go through today. And I got my Arch-Warlock charged by an Empire general on horse and 18 greatswords, Empire greatswords. That's a lot of stuff at one model. Now, given your Arch-Warlock, the Ikit Claw model, traditionally one of my most favorite models of all time, is in power armor. He's got the 3-up save, and then his 3-up is clearly because he's in power armor, by the way. I call it the Mark 0.5 Space Marine power armor. But he was Mystic Shielded, so he's on a 2-up, and all these things charge into me. And the general goes first and swings and whiffs and does nothing. And then my guy goes, hits, wounds, and I blow a charge and kill the guy outright with my initial attack, which is a 3 damage attack. Crush that Empire general's head with the main fist attack, his claw, just like a fresh fruit, just pop. And then the greatswords pile in and it's like swing around me. It's this very small base the Arch-Warlock's on. So there could only be like 7 or some greatswords attacking me given their 25 mil base. And after pile in, and they did like 1 wound to me. And then I had killed some of them with the halberd. And then then it was my turn. And by the end of my turn, there was 1 greatsword left. So like, that's the kind of things that Skryre can do, especially now. Going wrong. Oh yeah, sure, man. I've lost too many games to count in turn 1. Like where I've blown up, especially in the old world where you had like misfire tables, where I've blown up, like every artillery I had has misfired in turn 1. Like I had multiple warp lightning cannons, explode. Okay, next, explode. Okay, then, my doom wheel goes out of control and shoots a lightning streak right down the side of right down the flank of my own troops. Yeah. If you play Skaven enough, you've had those games. Honestly, I'm not sure I can tell you a specific story because they don't register to me. I don't remember those terrible ones. They happen often enough. I'm just like, yep, that happened again. Oops. It's not as bad now. I will say, like, those downsides are honestly much more controlled. And, you know, now what happens is I tend to blow up a few of my own guys every game. And I'm like, well, that happened. Okay.
I remember, before we get into the list, just a little more on this. I remember when I was testing out Age of Sigmar early stages, before points. So I guess BP, AOS BP, hashtag. And I went against one of the local guys who was a tournament player in 8th, and he was looking to go and join AOS, and he was testing out his list. And I said, okay, I'm going to put Nagash on the table. And we had wounds, which was the only way we could kind of try to balance the game out. But he brought out, I said, just try to break this. We're testing. We're playing the scenarios. And he brought out a whole slew of artillery. And down the line, I think it may have been like 90% of his stuff just popped. I keep knocking out my earpiece here. 90% of his stuff just blew up. And it was disheartening because I was expecting to see him just explode Nagash turn 1, which he probably would have done because that many mortal wounds is going to, you know, from warp fire throwers, warp fire cannons and the like, probably would have happened. But to his credit, he stayed in the game. And at the very end, he lost an entire unit of 20 Stormvermin. And it was a unit of clan rats that finally took down the big Nagash. So Nagash fell to clan rats. And I tell this story all the time. Because he was fairly untouched for most of the game, and the clan rats finished him off. Okay, so let's start off with the list. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll see if I can do this the right way.
So let's. So we got 3 lists here, right? So let's start with the Skryre warp charge bombs or whatever whatever that's called. Something like that is what I called it.
Something like that. Okay, so I've got my screen shared, and it is locked. So let me know if that is the case. Let's see if you see that. And you want the Skryre warp fire bomb. All right.
Something like that. I don't remember what I named it. I just name these things funny things that occur to me when I'm doing it.
All right, here we go. I think we have some stuff that's below the fold here, so I will run down and just give me a heads up if you want me to move to specific scrolls, and I'll just keep popping them up because I have them all queued up. I don't have the battalions, so I guess you'll have to describe the battalions, but I guess we won't really necessarily need them.
Yeah, we don't really need them. Okay, so this is sort of this is what I'll call just like a pretty basic Skryre list. This is this uses the first thing that we need to talk about with Clan Skryre is that Skryre has weird battalions called engine covens, but they're still battalions. They're just small ones that have remained relatively cheap. The engine covens can roll up into a mega battalion called Clan Skryre. Okay. So if you're familiar with the idea of battalions rolling into mega battalions from Sylvaneth and Stormcast and that kind of stuff, it's the same principle here.
But where are they found? Because I went actually and looked for them not only in the GHB 17, but I went looking in them in the app, and I couldn't find them. So is there a specific place where they show up?
They are in the app. They are in the their points values are still listed in GHB2. They're absolutely still legal. Originally, you can also find them in Grand Alliance Chaos.
Okay, so that's where you're going to find them mostly. Yeah, I did see the points
on the cover.
I did see the points. I just didn't see the actual details, the cover sheet. So I was wondering if I was looking in the right place.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So anyways, so that's how the engine covens work. The key is you can roll Skaven. Wow. Skaven. that's Clan Skaven. Clan Skaven Skryre. A lot of funny words here. Clan Skryre is an interesting army to play in because they can still achieve 1-drop armies in a couple different ways, even in the New World. They have access to relatively cheap engine covens. They can achieve 1 or low drops quite easily. These are still relatively reasonably priced battalions at 50 points, 100 points, 150, and so on and so forth. The Clan Skryre Mega Battalion is a straight 100 points, and all of these have some interesting abilities, but they still act like battalions, lessening your drops, providing additional items and stuff like that. Okay, so let's talk about the general principle with this list, which I realize I left my extra magic item out of this when I saved it and gave it to you. So I am very sorry about that. You do have a second magic item choice in this one, an artifact choice.
Okay.
Because of the battalion.
I have the allegiance stuff I can pull up if you want to.
I've got it ready. It's all good. But I apologize. I had added it, but then apparently I had hit save.
No problem.
So sorry about that to all the listeners.
You're fired.
So sure. So this one is what I would call just a pretty basic, fun gas cloud chokelung list. So the gas cloud chokelung is the engine coven that's all about, like, your basic conception of it is it has to have all of these are led by an engineer, and then the clan Skryre is led by an Arch-Warlock. Okay. So the chokelung has 1 Warlock engineer, 1 to 3 units of Stormfiends, 2 to 5 units of Acolytes, and 1 to 5 poisoned wind mortars. Okay. So that's a
lot of wind mortars.
Sure, absolutely. So this is a relatively lower drop army, although still not certainly, there's a couple of different ways you could push this. This is a more balanced take on the list. Obviously all of the wind mortar teams, the Stormfiends, the Acolytes, and 1 of the engineers fall into the gas cloud chokelung and can come down as a single drop, right? Now, the clan rats, the other engineer, and the Arch-Warlock and the Doom Wheel are outside of it. So there's that. If you count what I just said, there's your drop number.
Got it.
The Arch-Warlock in this is what I call like the charge. The reason I called this like the warp charge list or something like that is because this one is really all about using the warp charge tokens out of which are clan Skryre's ability. So before we get into anything else, it'd be important to understand how clan Skryre's allegiance ability works. So they have the standard nonsense that all Skaven have, which is the bravery and numbers thing that's going to be completely useless to clan Skryre in a lot of cases. Not every case, but in many cases. Basically strength and numbers. But we need to talk about Warpstone Sparks. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so Warpstone Sparks work like this. At the start of the battle, you get 3 plus a D3 of them. That's the first part to understand. So you're going to average 5 of these. Okay. All right, cool. What can you do with them? All right. So they can be used. Each Warpstone Spark can be used once per battle. They're a consumable thing. They can either reroll a casting roll or unbinding roll for a Skryre wizard, or to reroll a failed hit or wound roll for an attack made by a Skryre hero. So that means an engineer or an Arch-Warlock, because those are your Skryre heroes. Or to double the damage characteristic of a weapon used by a Skryre model from your army for 1 successful attack.
Now, do you have to pick that in advance, or can you pick it after the fact?
You must decide if you want to re-roll a roll immediately after making it. You cannot use more than 1 Warpstone Spark in the same phase. End of thing. So timing wise, you get to decide after the the hits and wounds and damages and all that. Yes, it is. So what that means is that we're going to talk about how we abuse that in a little while. But the key here is, and then of course you've got your downside, as per always, roll a die after using the Warpstone Spark and completing the spell or attacks it was used to effect. On a roll of 1, the unit that cast the spell or made the attack suffers D6 mortal wounds. So the which to me, who cares? I will take that every time, especially when you see what I'm going to use it on in this list. That downside might as well say, sometimes things die. Who cares? Irrelevant. All right, so we can go back to the list. An important note to make about the way that double the damage thing is phrased. It's doubling the damage characteristic. And so what that doesn't work on are things that deal like just straight mortal wounds, where like if you look at like a warp fire thrower and it says like a D6 mortal wounds to a unit within blah inches, then you can't use your charge token on that, no matter what, because that's not the damage characteristic of the weapon. The damage characteristic is a specific thing that occurs in the chart. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Meaning I can't just take my D6 Warpfire Thrower when I roll a 6 and make it 12. Okay. Unfortunately. That's okay. It doesn't matter. We're still going to get to 12. Don't worry. Because 12...
Not 13? Oh.
Well, sadly. And there was another question that was raised of, does the effect still happen even if the wounds are taken?
Right.
Yes, because it says you do all that stuff, and then after everything's been resolved, you roll to see if you just killed yourself. So you're always getting the charge.
This is a big deal because I've seen this contention before, and it's just basic grammatic. It's English. What happens before the comma and after the comma? Yes.
Yeah, they were pretty careful about this one in saying that, like, after you've resolved everything, now do this. So okay. All right. So the relevant traits here that we've given this guy, this Arch-Warlock, is Masterful Scavenger and Warp Resonator. So we're pushing the charge thing. Masterful Scavenger means you start with an extra D3 warp tokens, and the Warp Resonator is so stupidly good. You can use one Warpstone Spark each turn for this model without having to expend any Warpstone Spark counters. Okay.
Is that the artifacts?
Yeah, it's number 2.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah. Each turn. Each turn.
Got it.
You get one for free. Now, you can never use more than one of these per phase, remember, right? So that is relevant. It's not like you can, like, hit with 4 poison wind mortars and drop 4 tokens and just blah, 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 right? One per phase. Okay. So, but the point here is that we're going to end up now with an average of 7 to start with and get to use 1 per turn for free. In my experience of running this list something like this list a couple times with these 2 abilities, I generally end the game with tokens, which is fine. Usually I have like 1, 2, or 3 left. Okay. And that's using them aggressively. It just works out that way because you'll tend to use like 1 per phase where it's super relevant, and there'll just be other times where you don't need to use it because things die on their own. You didn't need to double it or whatever. All right, so that's why this little pack is like this. I should take a quick moment to explain the Gas Cloud Chokelung and what it does. I quite love the Gas Cloud Chokelung ability. In short order, it's your engineer can point at a poisoned wind mortar or a unit of acolytes and say, in the hero phase, and say, do a d6 mortal wounds to that unit that's in your weapon range.
Nice.
That's it. So it's just every hero phase you get to say, do a d6 mortal wounds to that guy. He's gonna point at the wind mortar teams, which will give you a 22-inch effective range for that. We'll talk about wind mortars more in a moment and how good they are and why they're the best weapon team in the universe.
By the way, Rob pointed out in the chat that it's actually under the paywall that this series of battalions. So if anybody's looking in the app, it's under. I guess it says Skryre, and it has these. Something like that?
Yeah, you'd have to. Yes, you can pick up the battle pack, or if you own Grand Alliance Chaos.
Or if you're on the right. Got it.
Yep. Yeah, there's both a battle pack or the book itself.
Right.
Okay, so in honesty, the stats. Let's look at the stats with you. If you have the Arch-Warlock scroll, let's bring him up. I love this model. I think what I want to talk about here is when we're talking about doubling damage, which is really my favorite use for this. In my experience of playing this several games. Since GHB 17. I mean, I will openly admit GHB 17 didn't come out that long ago, but I've gotten several games, and with a list like this and using these tokens, the 2 things I find myself doing the vast majority of the time are the spell reroll and the double damage. With the double damage thing being like by far the thing that gets chosen. Not only is this an amazing fig, but this guy is pretty great for his cost. He's 140 points, 6-inch move, so he's got the standard faster move of Skaven foot troops, 6 wounds, slightly higher wound count, 3-up save. Like I said, he's in Mark 0.5 power armor. He has this like once per battle warpfire gauntlet thingamajiggy, which is good. I wish he could do that. My true only regret with this guy is that he just doesn't have that shooting attack. I hate that is limited to once per game. It's like it gets in my craw every stupid time. Like it should just be every round, but it's not. So here we are. But that's fine. What we care about here is the Piston Claw. So when we think about warp charge tokens and the ability to
piston what?
The Piston Claw, his main crunchy claw there.
Okay. Piston is claw. Okay, got it.
Yes. So the thing we want to think about with our warp charge tokens is what doubling is doing. It should be fairly obvious to everybody. It's doubling the number. So the bigger the base number, the more we get out of that charge. What I mean by that is doubling a 1 to a 2, I only gained 1 damage. Doubling a 6 to a 12, that same 1 charge bought me 6 damage. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yep. Yes, I do.
Okay, so we're always going to be seeking to maximize the value of every charge token. Okay. So he has a spell, Warp Storm. It's fine enough. It can splash mortal wounds around whatever. It's like, again, it's just more mortal wounds, which is not bad. But that Piston Claw is what it's all about. If that thing hits and wounds, then we're going to double damage immediately. Like because once we know that we've rended off that armor or whatever, we're just going to crush some skull because that's a 6 damage punch. And 6 damage on a punch ain't no joke, yo.
And it's -2. You're probably going to get through.
Yeah. So this is that is a great target for it. Yeah. Again, you can't ever really plan on it because his main hit's on a 4-up. And if you have to use your token to reroll the hit, then you can't use it to reroll the damage or to add double the damage because remember, 1 per phase, right? And then he's got his halberd, which is also decent enough. Like, don't get me wrong, this guy is not a melee combatant. Okay, he's not meant for that. But he's actually quite capable of handling himself should the need be. If he gets charged by a bunch of infantry and is Mystic Shielded, which of course he's a wizard, he can Mystic Shield himself or be supported by his engineers. A dude on a 2-up save can generally withstand most standard melee dudes. And if you then turn and hit those melee dudes with that Piston Claw and put 6 damage into a unit, you can do some good work.
I could see him taking down most heroes though, most standard heroes. I mean, he's got an extra wound.
Sure.
Yeah, and he could easily pop him in 1 shot. So
correct. It's about getting that hit and wound off, right? So it's very dice dependent because you've only got 1 attack. It's very swingy.
Don't rely on this.
Correct. If you get the hit and wound off, you just kill the hero instantly, basically, in most cases. Like if the wound gets through, poof, dead. So there you go. Okay, so this guy's great. I love this dude, but he's basically there in this list to just be a charge machine, right? Okay, so that's that guy. Let's talk about. So let's go back to the list here.
You got it.
Let's talk about #Horde meta. There's been a lot of talk recently about the rise of hordes, right? Of the fact that we're all going to be staring down ungodly number of hordes. So my answer to #Horde meta is Poisoned Wind Mortars, maybe the greatest 60 points you will ever spend in your life. Let's bring up that war scroll. I do not know how I don't see these all the time because they are so great. And these things have done so much work for me.
I was actually surprised to see that I couldn't find it in the app. I had to go to the compendium.
Correct.
Which you got lucky. They didn't take away your keyword.
This thing is so good. All right, so 6-inch move, 3 wound, little dude with a garbage save. Who cares? Because he has the best defense in the world, which is high arcing shot. A poison wind mortar team can shoot at an enemy unit that is not visible to them. My standard response to these guys is to pile them behind buildings, in buildings, behind anything I can do. In other words, I just literally put them out of sight of everything because they just don't need to see anything. So who cares? Make it so no one can shoot back at them. Ugh. I mean, because if people can shoot at them, they will just drop dead. These things are glass cannons in the truest sense of the word. Their main shot is the Poisoned Wind Mortar, which makes 1 attack. It's got a base 6 to 22-inch range. Nobody should be getting in your mins there. 4-up, -2 rend, D6 damage. Now, that sounds okay at first blush, but we're going to get to the goods. Don't worry. The first thing we want to talk about is more range, which we're going to use only when we need to. But it basically, you roll a die on a 2 or more, the range becomes 30 inches. Well, there's a magical thing about 30 inches. It's 6 inches into the enemy deployment zone, right? So if you don't want to put these guys in the line, generally, unless terrain works out that way, but you can be a couple inches back into your zone, completely out of line of sight, and still reach the front of their lines turn 1 without moving, right? That's why 30 inches is magical. And then, of course, the Wind Mortar Gas Cloud. So this is why we're answering #Horde meta. You can add 1 to any hit rolls for Poison Wind Mortar attack if the target unit has 10 or more models. In addition, if the target unit has 20 or more models, increase the damage from D6 to 6.
Blanket 6. Oh my god.
That is correct. Could you tell me, and what does 6 become with a warp charge token? Why it becomes 12.
Oh my god.
And nothing will wreck a horde's day. I mean, consider like hitting a pack of bloodletters or something with this, and you kill 12 of them. They have no save against that. You hit, you wound. That's 12 dead bloodletters.
Oh. And
Like,
you've got it 3 up to hit, and you've got 4 of these guys.
Correct. I've got 4 of these guys. So yes,
I love it.
Like you're just like again, they're one of their numbers is a 4 up. You will miss with these guys a fair amount, even on it. Like it's fine. You're going for, I've got 4 shots at this. On a 3 up, statistically, I hit with 2 or 3 of them and wound with 1 to 2 of them. Right. That's how the math works out. And if I'm hitting a horde, that means if I can get 2 of these into a horde and blow 1 charge token, that's 18 damage. That's the math.
That's the unit.
Yeah, I mean you can crack hordes fast.
You're gonna battle shock if they're not immune. You're gonna battle shock them right off, whatever's left.
Yes, like your prime target for this is anybody who's not battle shock immune, right? So if they have multiple hordes and one of them isn't battle shock immune, that's where you go. Like every time, because you will just like picking up 12 dudes for a unit not immune to battle shock says see you later a lot of the rest of the unit, right? So these guys are just absolute crackers. And the important part is if you're not staring down hordes, okay, I have also used these guys in games where once the hordes are kind of under control, people like to hide characters. I am not afraid to throw all 4 of these at a 5 wound character I need to kill. Okay. If that 5 wound character that's hiding back there is on like a 4 up save, I'll throw 4 dice at a 4 up that's going to rend off most of his armor and do D6 damage. I can probably put that guy into the ground pretty fast, no matter, you know what I mean? So unless he's carefully out of your 30-inch range, you can use this pack of 4 dudes to assassinate critical heroes as well. It's not the primary role, but it can certainly fill in and still accomplish that task. Many times I have taken out like critical components. Like most recently, I used this to blow an engineer off the table. You know, my an opponent of mine was using an engineer in the middle of a bunch of cannon or a bunch of nonsense, but his cannons couldn't counter battery my wind mortars because I was behind a building, right? So I could see him, he couldn't see me. He had cannons, not hellblasters or something he could shoot. So I just blew the engineer off the table.
If only you could blow up the terrain, but you can't.
Indeed. Buildings are invincible, regardless of how many cannonballs get shot into them. Okay. All right. So let's go back to the list, and I'll talk about kind of more what's going on.
All righty. Here we go. Good.
Okay. So other components are pretty straightforward. We got a 6-pack of Stormies and a 3-pack of Stormies. We can run these in a couple different ways. You know, I like to run them. I like to run these guys as the 6-pack as a melee force and the 3-pack as a support shooting force, but your mileage may vary. I will generally put the drill onto these guys and then give the rest Doomplayer gauntlets and, you know, kind of bring them up where I need them and pray for the 9. I'm crazy enough to believe that I can roll a 9 often, and it works out often enough.
I love that they can do the tunneling. That's just I've seen it happen a couple of times. It really is pretty scary to have these guys come up even 9 inches away.
So yes, exactly. Like it's fine. Like I get them up there. I like Doomflayers. But again, there's another reason I really like the Grinder Fist, okay? So the Grinder Fist is what lets you tunnel, right? So one of your guys is going to be armed with a Grinder Fist, yeah?
Right.
And the Grinder Fist guy makes 4 attacks at 4 up, 3 up, -2 rend, 3 damage. I was playing a game recently where I got these guys charged by a pack of Brutes, and the Brutes charged into me after, like I was already in combat with something, and the Brutes charged into me. And they did whatever they did. Like maybe I don't know, all 5 Brutes killed maybe like a Stormfiend. And then the drill guy turned around and I managed to get 1 wound through the Brute's armor and warp charge token that to insta-kill 2 Brutes. 6 damage, 3 apiece, right? So the point being is that like that charge token has another interesting play here because again, you use it once you know you've hit and wounded. So even though the Grinder Fist is less accurate, you can still get that off. Same with the Doomflayers and stuff like that are still a perfectly good, legitimate target for it. I like the Doomflayers because of the rend. I tend to favor high rend over anything else, but so there you go. Because to me, this army has other shooting and you need some kind of melee threat up there just causing havoc in their lines. But
you
these
only
guys,
you can only use that tunneling once, correct?
correct, yeah.
Just to bring them in. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but I mean that also the key is when they're Doomflayer equipped, it gives all of your Doomflayer gauntlet guys like 7 wounds instead of 6. You know, these guys have a lot of durability. Like they can just stand there and take unbelievable punishment, and with the ability to just like make those critical attacks do double damage, you can really just flatline a lot of enemies quite suddenly. In that same combat, I killed a giant outright by doing the same thing in the previous round. Like the giant had been wounded already, and then I hit him with the grinder fist when he had like 5 wounds left, and I was just like, zip, you're dead. You know, because like that's it. I only needed 1 through. He had 5 wounds. He had no save against it. You're dead, stupid giant. Die. Right. So, and again, like I'm certainly more than willing. I'm certainly more than willing to risk the chance of a D6 mortal wounds on a Stormfiend. Like, who cares? Right? Like, chances are it doesn't even kill them. So it's like very high chances it doesn't kill them. If they're one of the 7 wound guys, there's no chance for it to kill them if they're undamaged. So this is one of the sort of units that has very little drawback to blowing those tokens. Let's talk about if we want to jump over to the Acolytes quickly, I'll talk about them, and then that's kind of the rest of this list.
All right, pull them up.
So Acolytes are a real challenging, fun, weird thing to use. Acolytes are definitively worthless until they do everything. So these are the little gas cloud guys. By the way, I would not recommend buying these actual figs. They're stupid expensive. I would recommend doing what I do, which is converting the your chuckers out of the back guy from the Poison Wind Mortar team. You can still get Poison Wind Mortar teams on the cheap from eBay, and then you can just you buy the Wind Mortar teams to get all the Wind Mortars you need, and I chop off the back guy and make an Acolyte out of him and put a random Skaven, random old clan rat behind the Wind Mortar.
You could magnetize him, I'm sure. Magnetize so you can bring him back to the.
No need. No need. Waste of time. Just stick a regular clan rat on the base.
I'm a crazy magnetizer, so
there is no need. That is over engineering, Mitch.
Like I usually do.
Yes, just replace the back guy with a stupid clan rat and use the back guy who has a backpack on and is carrying a big green ball. Like the back guy of a Wind Mortar team has a backpack and is carrying a big green ball.
It's not like you don't have extra rats, right?
Correct. You're always going to have tons of extra just regular clan rats. All right. So the key with these Wind Globey dudes is that they are almost worthless until they just wreck face. Their bravery is 4. I want to point that out. They have a range of 9 inches, so very slow, very little mid range. And they hit on 4 up, 4 up. But again, -2 Ren D3 damage. You're getting 5 shots out of a pack of 5 of them, hitting on 4, wounding on 4, -2 Ren D3 damage. Now, they can shoot at enemies that are not visible to them. It's very unusual to get to trigger that because actual line of sight blocking with only 9 inches in the middle is pretty tough. And like I mentioned, I saw somebody in the comments mentioning putting behind them, having them behind other units because they don't need to see. At least at my table, units don't block line of sight. Like if you can see any part of the unit, you can see. So like units don't block line of sight.
It's very hard. It's very hard to have an interposing unit in true line of sight block line of sight. It has to be something that's kind of solid.
Right. Yeah. So just my personal take on it. But if your table plays differently, these could be much more valuable. Now, and then the key is then again, they get +1 to hit if they're firing at a unit of 10 or more models. The tricky part about these guys is actually moving them up into range where they will actually hit and not just die instantly. So the goal for these guys is to try to just skulk around. Like they just literally skulk around. You kind of hide them behind buildings. You move them out to take points, but rarely, or hold something in your own deployment zone. Their real job is to be just there and not the big threat. You use the Stormfiends to sort of draw attention. You use, the engineers to start cracking off D6 damage, mortal wound spells to draw the attention. And then these guys just literally skulk until they can kind of move up and pick a target. You're never going to get more than 1 decent round out of these guys in a game. So I think often when we think about a unit, we think about what they do in each round. I don't think about that with these guys. With these guys, I think what is the one round where I can get these guys to do something, right? And so I'll kind of skulk them, and I think it's like 3 chess moves ahead. I skulk them around, get the Stormfiends engaged, skulk up again safely, and then in the next round, I finally move them up, and then I can just like bomb something next to them, right? Or something like that. So the idea being that because if they actually can land in a unit, again, these guys can do real work, right? Like if you can get them into a unit that's got 10 models and you're dropping like 5 bombs that are hitting on 3s, wounding on 4s, -2 Ren, D3 damage, you'll kill some dudes. But the key is you don't ever plan on that happening. You don't need it to happen, and it's never going to happen more than once. Make sense?
Sounds good.
And then if we go back to the big list, I'll kind of close out this one and we'll move on. The last thing in the list is your ally pack of 40 clan rats. These are your big giant pack of rats that sit there and hold a point. Like body blocking is a thing in the scenarios. You need to have a lot of dudes. That's called how to solve the body problem. In general, your Arch-Warlock doesn't have his own command ability. It's one of the lacking things of this army. So who cares? He'll just generally sit around and make them immune to battle shock. And that's fine. You had nothing else to do anyways with that command ability. The Doom Wheel, by the way, is your suicide machine. You're literally just like, it is there to run out and cause problems. It's there to just like random move forward. It's always going to move its double speed thing. It's just there to like go and just throw it at something, get in the way of enemy chaff, get people to charge it off in a wrong direction.
It's awesome.
It's there to be a problem. It will die. Who cares? You know, it doesn't matter.
As an aside, I know that you haven't played the Warhammer Total War 2, but it is awesome in the game. The graphics for it are amazing.
So that's kind of the way that one works. Yeah, it's just there to die and cause some problems on the way. Okay, so now let's talk about the general Skaven list. So the one that's not called supplies.
Okay, so that's the Thankwol one?
Yeah.
All right. Thankwol and Bone Ripper. All right.
I wanted to do a general Skaven list. By the way, we didn't mention this at the beginning, but I feel like this is key to mention. We're not talking about Pestilence today because Pestilence is so big and so its own thing. I think we had talked and said it needs its own show.
Right.
So we
I was gonna mention it at the tail end. Yes, we are not dealing with Pestilence. We're gonna do an entire show about Pestilence because, as you mentioned, Vince, and you, it was your direction. We're just gonna be able to fill that show just with that alone. So yes, look out for part 2 coming sometime soon.
Right. So Pestilence has a whole lot of different stuff going on, so it needs to be its own world. Okay. Anyway, this is my sort of like generic Skaven list, so once we talk about generic Skaven and we're not in Skryre or Pestilence, we're just under Chaos Allegiance. So we need to use that to our advantage to kind of free us up. And so this one's just this is a good old wacky time with some Skaven. Now, things about this list, it has a very high number of drops. There are no battalions here, so you will, it will naturally like not have the choice of who gets to go first because everything here is a drop. However many you see on the screen, I didn't even bother counting them.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11. See, I see. Yeah, my standard death list you'll still beat my standard death list at 14. Go ahead. What do you want to look at first?
Okay, so the Warlord is just here to be the Warlord and to rock the command trait and sort of be the general or whatever. Let's talk about Thankwol or that's fine. We can do the Warlord. He's just here to be that guy.
Okay, I'll go right off of him.
Well, let's talk about Thankwol first. We'll come back to the Warlord when I talk about the clan rats and the Stormvermin. Let's talk about Thankwol and the Deceiver.
Okay. Oh, which one do you want to pull up first?
Thankwol.
All right. Thankwol, Bone Ripper, you got it. There we go.
Okay, so Thankwol and Bone Ripper.
I love it when I get one of these war scrolls where even if I zoom in, it's too much friggin' text for the people viewing to read it. Good.
Okay. So I truly love this guy. He's expensive. He's 450 points. He ain't cheap. And we are 13 wounds, 4 up save, blah blah blah. Fine, 10-inch move, unwounded. Interesting things about him obviously is that he heals a wound in each hero phase. That's super cool. His little warpstone addiction thing is cool, that when he attempts to cast a spell, he can consume a piece of warpstone, roll a die on a 2 or more. You can re-roll the subsequent casting attempt if it's failed. A pretty great thing, especially since his spell, you know, is what it is, and other magic can often fail. That's like re-rolls on casting is super good. I don't think I need to explain that. It's probably obvious. He's a double caster, which is awesome. So he can attempt to unbind and cast 2 spells, which is sweet. And obviously he's got your standard clutch as well as Scorch. The casting value of Scorch can get very high very fast, which is silly. The advantage to Scorch is that it has like a much longer range than most spells at 26 inches, but it is just a long range arcane bolt unless you're targeting other Skaven, which is the silliest, funniest thing.
Still nice to have a second one of those, especially if the first one gets dispelled or
sure.
Unbound.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I love I love more mortal wounds. I love more mortal wounds, so hey, why not? Okay, and let's talk about them warp fire projectors, because that's where the magic happens. So I always equip this guy with warp fire projectors, and basically, yeah, no, just here in what he had on him. Right. So his warp fire projectors are pretty straightforward. When firing his warp fire projectors, pick a unit within range. It suffers 2d6 mortal wounds. The range is 8 inches. That is, thus endeth the ability.
You don't need a whole lot more. Maybe short range, but geez.
It's real good. It's real good. All right, so then let's talk. Now let's go to the Deceiver. And certainly I'm not the first person to talk about this, but some of your viewers might not be familiar with maybe the best spell in all of Age of Sigmar.
All right, I'm going to try and zoom in a little bit here.
Oh, he's a Deceiver. Okay, so the Verminlord Deceiver. Ignore everything on this page because all of it is fairly irrelevant until we talk about Skryre. So he's a wizard. More wizards are good. Again, we won't be using his command ability because he's not the general. But he has an ability called Skryre. And what he can do is he can take another Skaven person, specifically another Skaven hero, like maybe a Thanquol and Bone Ripper, and his casting value of 3. I will repeat that.
For anybody who might not be listening or didn't believe what they heard.
3. He can remove the selected model from the battlefield and then set it up again anywhere on the battlefield that is more than 6 inches from an enemy model. Not the normal 9, 6. 6 is less than 8. 8 is the range of warp fire projectors. I think you understand where this is going.
Yep.
It should also be noted that he can zip himself around, right? Because it's this model or another. So he can also just zip himself over somewhere, which means that he can put himself in range of his little Doomstar, which is perfectly fine, but also in range of a pretty easy charge. And this guy is actually quite adept in melee, especially against very particular targets. What you don't want to do is put this guy into a swarm, like a bit like you mentioned the clan rats pulling down Nagash. That's the sort of thing that will pull this guy down, right? Because he's only a 4-up save, so just mass attacks will absolutely get him into trouble. But if you've got like a small elite high armor unit, like not a large number, say goodnight, Gracie, because this dude jumps in there and his 5 attacks, 3-up, 2-up, neg 3 rend.
Neg 3!
D3 damage.
Might as well be mortal wounds.
I love a guy that completely shreds a 4-up save off. That is like one of my favorite things. And of course, we would be remiss if we didn't mention that this guy has an ability called Shrouded in Darkness, which is absolutely amazing, where your opponent subtracts 2 from all hit rolls he makes that target the Verminlord Deceiver in the shooting phase. Absolutely stunningly good ability. Neg 2 to hit him in shooting phase is so good. Obviously that makes him like unmortal woundable under most cases by things like Skyfires, because it makes it so they can never roll the right number. It's a great protection. Now, one quick note about that. Keep in mind that neg 2 to hit is only in the shooting phase. So there are a couple weird things like consider charging a unit of handgunners where they get to like pipe and stand and shoot reaction you. You would not get the neg 2 against that because it's not the shooting phase when that's happening. Okay. So you do need to be very careful. Remember, that's not a -2 blanket against all shooting, only the shooting phase.
Right.
So out of sequence shooting can still really kill this guy. So just be careful with stuff like that.
Would that count for models that could shoot in other phases, but quote unquote as if in the shooting phase? That shoot out of sequence? Because the handgunners is the reaction, where if you get within range, they can then take a round of shooting. But there are other models that can actually shoot in, like, I don't know, the
hero phase.
The hero phase, right.
Yeah, it doesn't matter that that's just for them. It says as though it were the shooting phase, but for you, it is still the hero phase, okay, or whatever it happens to be. It is not the shooting phase. The static effect here that's being checked is on this model. You're not benefiting from whatever rules it says on their war scroll. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes.
Okay, so let's go back to the big list. So that's just a fun little combo. You can whip people around. It should be pointed out, you could also whip around the Warlord, and the Warlord has a fun little ability to, like, after he fights, roll a die, and on a 4-up, he gets to retreat, which is neat. The notable part here is that the artifact is actually on the Deceiver. And the artifact is the Chaos Runeblade, which we've picked his Warp Stiletto, so it's just an extra attack. So you actually make 6 attacks with that brutal -3 rend weapon. It's just an extra little thing that'll help him shred through more stuff faster. The command trait here is Cunning Deceiver, which is just -1 to be hit in general in the first round. Would stack with the appropriate other stuff. So, like, the Deceiver's -3 to be shot in the first round, which is pretty great, and -1 otherwise. Makes him basically immune to shooting for the most part in the first round. The Plague Priest is there because I happen to have the points remaining, but also because he's another interesting sort of source of mortal wounds and just another interesting way to get a hero out there for things like Duality of Death, where you need a free hero to maybe roam around and hold a point or something like that. This guy just, he's just a sort of generically useful dude, but who also has a pretty great prayer that is still useful here. Specifically Wither, where you can pick a unit within 13 inches, and until your next hero phase, that unit is ravaged by a terrible wasting sickness. Add 1 to all wound rolls made against that unit. This is a generally extremely useful prayer in my estimation. So, great. There you go.
I like the model. It's a pretty cool looking model.
Yeah, specifically, this is the different, like, but the other one with the plague, the other one's the one I'm talking about because his abilities are slightly different, but that's fine.
Right.
But no big deal. It's close enough. The point is he's got a decent enough prayer that will help us out here. Okay. So we've still got 2 Poison Wind Mortar teams because, hashtag Horde meta. And our other trick, this really is about taking the fight to them. So I mentioned the Thankful and Bone Ripper and Verminlord Deceiver teleportation shenanigans. Now let's talk about the Warp Grinder team and the Stormvermin. So a Warp Grinder team, what it does is it lets you basically tunnel up, and it sort of gives you like the Stormcast roll a 3 and you can drop somebody, right? Kind of puts people in the heavens. This is the same way. Instead of in the heavens, you're in the tunnels. And in general, the way you're going to use it in this list is you're going to tunnel with your Stormvermin. So on if you roll a 3 in your movement phases, you can then resurface and bring that. Not only does this grinder team come up, but you bring the entire 40 block of Stormvermin up as well. And 40 Stormvermin suddenly appearing are, pretty good. Pretty good. Now you still have to be 9 inches away, of course, from your enemy. And so you've still got to land a relatively longer charge. If we go over to Stormvermin, I'll show you kind of why I particularly love these guys. And depending on the matchups, you could also just burrow depending on what you needed to accomplish, you could also just burrow the clan rats, because you get to choose what you burrow at the beginning of the game. And if you want to just throw clan rats somewhere as to go take a far point, where you're not concerned with fighting with the model, you just want to get 40 models on a point, you could do that too, right? So there's versatility here.
All right, let me just get the Stormvermin up.
Sure.
Alrighty. Yep. Took me a second there. Go. All right.
Okay, Stormvermin. So there's a couple interesting things about Stormvermin. So, the things I want to mention about them are they have a decent move and they have an absolutely great attack profile for a model of this type and a model of this cost. 2-inch range, which means on their base size, you can actually get a vast majority of them in combat. Okay. Because again, they can reach over the top of their buddies, right?
Right.
They make 2 attacks each. Thumbs up. But always good. Normally 4 up, 3 up. Neg 1 rend, so the unit itself packs rend, which is again very good, and 1 damage. What we need to talk about here is a couple of different things. So, and the most important of which being the standard bearer ability and the drummer ability, and then murderous frenzy. So the standard bearer ability says if you can retreat and charge in the same turn. So unbelievably powerful.
Oh my god, yes.
Because this 40 pack, you can make it so you charge in, you swing, they swing, whatever, and then you can pull out, right? When you have the opportunity to retreat and go fight something else. And this opens up castling opportunities where you can get them onto a more high value target and you retreat them out and then charge in with your clan rats or something to just finish the job, right? You're not stuck there and you don't have to waste a turn retreating to finish a unit off or something, right? So it lets you be much more mobile and reactive. And then the pack drummer says whenever you run or retreat, you move an extra 2 inches. So the point being they have a very significant retreat where they can move 8 inches out of combat and then still charge. So this actually makes them, you can really swing around the battlefield quite efficiently with this whole big block, retreating out of combat and then charging something else in ways that people often forget about or don't appreciate.
It surprises you. It has surprised me.
Yeah, and then, of course, the most important ability is Murderous Frenzy, where you add 1 to hit rolls for a Stormvermin if it targets a unit that has fewer models than its own unit. That's why we have this pack up at 40. You know, the key is pick your fights. Don't charge other 40 blocks. Lots of units cap at 30 or small elite units. Those are the types of things we want to get into and then get choppy on because suddenly we fall to a 3-up profile. I will mention that if we remember our little Plague Priest buddy who's floating around, you know, getting him to wither the unit these guys are fighting can be an incredibly potent thing because then they go to 3-up, 2-up, neg 1 rend 1 damage. You know, that's a really, really powerful thing for a unit that could easily get 30 guys or 25 guys into melee reach because of their 2-inch reach. And so hence making 50 to 60 attacks, right? Like this becomes a lot of potential wounds being dealt with rend. So now let's flip over to the warlord that we had before.
Okay.
Another reason I like that retreat and charge thing, by the way, is because, and with the warp grinder team, is if you do grind them up and fail that charge, you have to fight kind of one round, you know, you have to fight some amount of time being bad, but then you can actually evac them and go charge the thing you wanted to charge. Not the best world, but, you know, especially if you play for the double turn, you can actually course correct pretty fast on failing that charge. So the warlord here is actually our general because he's going to use his command ability on our big blocks. He's going to be choosing, you know, most often that Skaven ability, which is a he's going to choose the Stormvermin, which is a verminous unit. And then until your next hero phase, all models in that unit make 1 extra attack with each of their melee weapons. Did I say 50 to 60 attacks? I'm sorry. I meant 75 to 90 attacks. Now we're cooking with gas, right? So that is chipper shredder level number of attacks. All with rend, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, you know, like that's Stormvermin get underestimated very easily, and they can really grind people into the ground. Especially if somebody forgets about the retreat ability and moves a unit trying to sweep around a combat, and suddenly you pull out, charge them, and just blow that unit off the field.
Yeah, don't underestimate Skaven, man. Don't underestimate Stormvermin. I've seen them chew through entire blocks of units, and especially things that maybe like the multi-wound units, like ogres. I've seen them just rip through ogres unbelievably.
Yeah, Stormvermin are great against things like ogres, brutes, stuff like that, where they tend to be lower model count, multi-wound models, because you're always going to get your +1 to hit. And, you know, those things tend to have like 4-up saves, 5-up saves, stuff like that. So again, you just put that -1 rend is incredibly impactful, and it will just gone. The Warlord's real ability is his strike and scurry away, where after he attacks, you can roll a die, and on a 4-up, he can just immediately retreat as if it were the movement phase. Do not underestimate this ability. Like, it is so good. It won't save him every time, but, well, to quote it quite literally, 50% of the time, it works 100% of the time. And when it does, it's immune. Like, he just becomes immune because he'll jump in, strike, and then leave. And you can't damage things that you can't attack. So that is a invulnerable save if there ever was one. Not being in combat is a pretty great save against combat attacks. So there you go. Oh, that's that guy.
Okay.
Let's go back to the larger list, and I'll kind of wrap this one up with some final thoughts on this one. But the key here is we've got 2 very large blocks we can move around. The 10 Marauders, by the way. Yeah, this is called How to Cheat because you're in larger chaos. I don't care. We took some slaves. Skaven love slaves. These are Marauder slaves. Now I've justified it for you narratively.
Yeah. For newcomers, yes, this is they are part of the Chaos Grand Alliance with all the benefits that they get from there.
Yep. The key with this one is you've got some good, interesting mobility in your ability with the Deceiver to throw the heroes around. You've got some good mortal wound output through things like Thankful and the various spells and stuff like that. And you've got 2 nice big blocks, one of whom is good for just sitting on a point, one of whom is good for actually dealing damage and holding, actually like putting out a pretty strong offense. And you've got a couple 10 packs of Marauders to float around, to bubble wrap, to sit on back points that need, that aren't under pressure. And then you've got the Wind Mortar teams to deal with enemy hordes. Wind Mortars can also thin enemy hordes, so your Stormvermin can go in and mop up very efficiently. Right. The reason, by the way, Marauders instead of more Clan Rats is because Clan Rats have a 20 minimum size. They're a great deal at 40 for 200. I mean, my God, they are bargain basement prices on 40 packs, but I don't want to do 20 minimum because I needed to fill out Battle Line. So Marauders it is.
All right. And we have nothing else on this one?
That is correct. And that's that list. So now we're going to talk about supplies. I'll leave your people to reference that one.
It's easy after you've said it. Sure. Oh my God! Look at all the weapon teams.
Oh yeah. So okay, this is a list to like lose friends on. All right.
I'm especially liking the fact that you have 3 battalions, but you go through it.
Yes. So a couple people mentioned this at the top of the show of whether or not this was going to show up because they're already on the inside of how to be a horrible person. And yes, this is that list. So this uses the Gas Cloud Choke Lung, again, the one we saw previously. I'm going to comment about that at the end because some of your very knowledgeable Skaven players might wonder why I use the Gas Cloud as opposed to the Arch Spark, which is basically 1 engineer and a Warp Lightning Cannon. I will touch on that. There's a reason why I did that, but I'll talk about because you can run this list in 2 very different ways, and it's fine. It works either way, whatever you like. Okay. So things we have here, we've got the Arch-Warlock. His trait this time is Verminous Valor, which basically gives him a 4-up invuln save because he can throw wounds to other nearby units, Skryre units. So it would basically, whenever he suffers a wound, he can roll a 4-up. And if so, it's like the Necromancer ability out of to be able to pass damage to death units. Similar principle. He still has the Esoteric Warp Resonator because it's stupid good. It's just a free charge every turn, so why not? And we do still have stuff we're going to use it on. Like we've still got Stormfiends in this list, and we've still got him, the Warlock himself, and we've still got a Wind Mortar team and crap like that. So it's still very useful. The other 2 engineers, because we've got all of our battalions, we get some extra artifacts. So we've got the Vigor Dust Injector and the Brass Orb. I will touch on those very quickly here. The Vigor Dust Injector, what it does is in your hero phase, you pick a friendly Skaven unit within 6 inches of this model. You add 1/2 charge rolls and hit rolls for that unit until your next hero phase. However, when the unit effects, when the effects wear off, it takes D3 mortal wounds. Okay, cool.
Okay.
Whatever. Neato burrito. We'll talk about that later of where we're going to use that. So the then we've got the brass orb. The brass orb is called, we got a free magic item. Let's go nuts. So the brass orb works like this. You can use this artifact once per battle in your shooting phase. When you do so, roll a die. On a roll of 6 or more, the closest enemy model within 6 inches of this model is slain.
Yeah.
Thus endeth the ability. So what we're doing here is the brass orb is called our long shot, right? Like, it's a 1 in 6 chance to kill any model. So you're gonna walk this guy up and like just be like, throw it at Archeon and see what happens.
Sure.
Right?
There's no save.
Because on a 6, he just dies. And killing Archeon on a die seems incredibly hilarious to me. So again,
it's a feather in your cap, man, to be able to kill something epic with a brass orb. That's a tale to be told. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Like, understand that this artifact is going to be the definition of useless in most games, okay? But I would never leave a list like this without it, because the 1 in 6, 10, 15 games, I don't care, it goes off, is going to be just like the greatest moment when you kill that, when you like throw Nagash in the hole, like, later, sucker. Yep. Zip. So when that Star Drake, when that whatever goes down in the hole,
yeah, exactly.
Sure, it's going to be an incredible moment. So there you go. All right, so let's talk about how this list actually plays. The new battalion is the Goutfire Scorch, which I'm sure many people are familiar with if you're familiar with the worst of the worst Skaven tactics. And the way the Goutfire Scorch works is effectively, it lets you sort of drop. It lets you deploy, like, tunnel up, drop from the heavens, however you want to call about it, much closer than 9 inches. So the Goutfire Scorcher is the Warlock Engineer, one of the unit of Stormfiends, all the Warp Fire Throwers, and the Warp Grinder. That's what's in this battalion. Okay? And what it does is, I will read verbatim so we all understand it. Instead of setting up a Goutfire Scorch engine coven on the battlefield, you can place it to one side and declare that it is constructing an elaborate network of tunnels beneath the surface. In any of your hero phases, the engine coven can surface under the watchful eyes of its Warlock Engineer. No roll, not like on a 3-up, it just does. Set up one of the Warp Grinder weapon teams anywhere on the battlefield. Then set up each other unit from the engine coven within 8 inches of it. Any unit that is set up within 3 inches of the enemy suffers D6 mortal wounds. So, in general, they incentivize you, not the enemy does, your crap does.
Yep.
Okay. So you, in general, want to avoid setting up your people like in combat range, because you're gonna, but you could, if worst case, like, again, your Stormfiends are part of this pack. They can take it if you need to. If you've got no other choice, they can take the heat, right? Like, I'll throw a D6 mortal wounds at them. So what? And so what's going to tunnel up here is 5 Warp Fire Thrower teams. And so in general, there's a couple different ways you can play this. You're a 1-drop army. Okay. All of this is under Clan Skryre. So this is a 1-drop army. So you will often get to choose first turn here. And there are 2 different, then you have an interesting choice to make. And this is why I love random turn order, because it lets you make interesting choices like this, depending on what you're up against. If you are up against a situation where you could wreak unbelievable havoc before they go Battle Shock immune, then you take the first turn and you tunnel up and you start spraying mortal wounds everywhere. And you just try to like assassinate key targets and Battle Shock off key units. Okay. Like, if their characters aren't so deep in their bubble wrapped lines that you literally can't place and get them in range, you can immediately like top of 1 kill all their synergistic heroes. Just unless they have incredible mortal wound protection, you can just melt them into slag. Okay. That is the outcome of that, because you're going to pop. And if your Stormfiends are armed with, and there's a couple different ways you could arm your Stormfiends in this unit, but you could arm them with Warp Fire projectors, meaning that what happens when this unit pops up is 5d6 plus 6d3 mortal wounds. Okay. That's a lot of mortal wounds. Okay. You know, so minimum 11, maximum of 78. They're somewhere in that range is where this damage does. Now, you can, so if you've got the opportunity, you can drop first, you can go and just say, I melt those 3 heroes and put a ton of damage into this unit before it's battle shock immune. By the way, units, there are some armies like New Empire where like anybody within 6 inches of or 9 inches or whatever of the general is battle shock immune. Like that's a common thing you see, right? That doesn't have to stop you because you can just melt that dude and then melt their troops. And guess what? When it comes time to the battle shock phase, that guy is nothing more than a pile of like melted flesh and armor. He ain't making anybody battle shock immune anymore. So the rest of the units can still battle shock off. So you just need to think about how you could remove key puzzle pieces from their synergy. It doesn't have to go that direction. You could also, what do I want to say? You could also put the like Doomflayers gauntlets on the Stormfiends. Okay. And because you're coming up in the hero phase, these guys, the key part about the gout, whatever this thing is called, Goutfire Scorch. It's a weird word. The key thing about this is that, remember, I said in any of your hero phases, you can come up. Remember the Warlock Engineer with the Vigor Dust Injector, okay? Where in your hero phase, you can choose to pick a unit and give this +1 to charge and hit rolls. Doomflayer Gauntlet, or sorry, not Doomflayer Gauntlets. You could go for like Shock Gauntlets, which are explosive on the hit. So Shock Gauntlets on your Stormfiends, if you roll a 6 or more to hit, explode from 1 hit into D6 hits. Okay. So with you can take the Vigor Dust Injector, and you could, because you're going to definitely land the charge, like you can come up at 3 inches with your guys, right? You can Vigor Dust them in the hero phase and then make it so now we're on a 5 or 6, they become +1 to hit. So if you don't need, like, again, there are a couple different ways to build this army, and it will give you different types of advantages and disadvantages. Those explosive Shock Gauntlets popping off on a 5-up will do more general damage than their 2d3 melty Warpfire Gauntlets. But they will do less against super high armor targets because they're only rend -1. Okay. But if you're plowing these guys into like 4 or 5-up troops, the Shock Gauntlets will pay far more dividends. Like you'll get in there in melee and you will just wreck shop. Okay. So does that make sense? Like you could still pop melt with the Warpfire throwers, then send in the Stormfiends and just go nuts punching the crap out of people. With explosive Shock Gauntlet attacks. So there's different ways you can arm these guys to different effects. The Gas Cloud Chokelung works much the same way as it did before. Those Stormfiends could be, they could be armed with their, like your off 3-pack. They could be armed with their own grinder, right? And they could just tunnel up on their own separately and kind of join that mass. Or they could tunnel up on the opposite side of the board and threaten something else. They could have guns. You could pop them up with rattling guns so that they're still in range because they'll need to be farther out. And they could just provide additional supporting pepper fire to like clean up after the mortal wound mess occurs. So there's lots of different ways. Like oftentimes just putting a lot of shots in can still have its own quantity, has its own quality. So the point is they could still dig and show up with the Goutfire Scorch. And chances are you filled that whole space near them anyway, so it doesn't matter that you need to drill up with their own personal driller more than 9 inches away. The Acolytes are there literally to do almost nothing. They're there to satisfy the requirement of the thing, but also to sit on points. Like they're 10 models. Ideally, you're so in the enemy's face that you can just kind of float those guys around and hold points. Like if comets are falling from the sky in that scenario, those guys can kind of wander out and go grab comets and stuff and just do their thing. They're where this army runs into real challenges are people who have high amounts of mortal wound protection and or people who themselves can be off the table. Because the other way that this could be played is, instead of going first and trying to just alpha strike them into the ground, is you play for the double turn. So you say, you go first and let them come at you. Like against a Bloodletter Bomb, I would let them go first every time, because I'll put everything in this list that's actually on the table against the back of the board.
Right.
And they'll never get... Let them run across the table. I'll drop in 4 inches away and kill every Bloodletter Bomb they have. Like that is an like murder host. You almost auto win. There's nothing they can do against you. Okay.
What's the range again for the weapon teams? They're how far is that again? The Warfire throwers.
8 inches off the top of my head. I don't
8 inches.
Throw right in front of me. It's a short.
So if you have a really good bubble wrap around key targets, it could impede you, but you're just going to blow through that stuff also.
Well, and that's why I say, like, so the other alternative here is you let them go first and start moving and pulling apart their lines and come to you. Where you really run into challenges are like this army's worst nightmare is probably like a Kinbad from Fire Slayers, where they can have a lot of stuff off the table. They have a lot of mortal wound protection. So now you get into this weird chicken match of like who's going to drop first, and they have enough stuff that's very scary that they can like wipe your stuff that is on the table off, and when you come down, you can't necessarily reprise because they have high mortal wound protection. So like a Kinbad is your, or Kinsbad, however you say it, is one of your, like, that is a tough matchup for this list.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a tough matchup for a lot of lists.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. You know, Siege, depending on how it plays, how bubble wrapped they are, could be very challenging because they can do a lot of very interesting things and sort of swap around. And they have plenty of mortal wounds to answer your mortal wounds, because your Warpfire thrower teams are very sensitive to like shooting and ranged reprisal. So like Zinch and all their magic could very easily just pick all those things off and eliminate them. So you have to be kind of careful with that with them. You need to like. A Zinch match is going to be much more of like a finesse match for you to win. You can't just overpower them in any way or shape or form. But so now let me talk very quickly here at the end about the other way you could build this. Instead of going with the Gas Cloud Chokelung, which I do really like, because you still have your Poison Wind Mortar, and that means you've got an extra D6 mortal wounds at a 22-inch range every hero phase. Like, it's good. It's really good. And you've still got a Horde Bomb thing to drop your, like, if it hits and wounds, you can still then token it, because remember, you've still got your Skryre tokens in this list, right? Now you cannot token the Warpfire throwers, okay, again, because it is not a damage characteristic. So although I would love it to no end if I could, like, God, that would be a wonderful world if I could. You cannot token either the Warpfire throwers or the Stormfiends Warpfire throwers. Right. So again, you need to think about, like, if your Stormfiends are armed in melee, they're much more prepped to take advantage of the charge tokens, right?
Has that ever come up in FAQ? I'm curious, because it seems pretty evident, but I'm sure that's a question that has come up at some point.
It's something I would like them to clarify it in FAQ. I've never seen it. I don't think it has been, because it does require a slightly nuanced reading of the rules. Like, we tend to think of those things as being interchangeable. They're not. But you know, I mean, by the way, if I'm reading it all wrong, somebody please correct me. But my understanding of it is it would not work as per everything I understand the way it works right now from the current clarification on the way mortal wounds are versus the damage characteristic.
I think you're right, but I've been wrong about things before too. So
sure. Believe me, if somebody wants to tell me you can use it in the more powerful way,
you'll be happy to do it.
Because holy crap, this list just get better. Because the one Warfire thrower that rolls a 6, I'm making 12.
It's all good news, right?
But as far as I know right now, that my understanding of it is the more conservative, that you cannot use it for that. Okay, so the other option here is that instead of the Engineer, Acolytes, and Wind Mortar, because that is the Gas Cloud Chokelung. Instead of that group, you could replace it all with a sort of single, the Warp Thritch, Warpfire, whatever it is, the one that's an Engineer and a single Warp Lightning Cannon. And what that would let you do is take the other 3 Stormfiends, which are the other thing filling out your gas cloud, and fold them into your Goutfire. So when that pack tunnels up, it's actually got 6 Stormfiends in it. Okay. Who could then be armed accordingly or whatever to whatever strategy as we had discussed through the previous strategies. And 6 Stormfiends and 5 Warpfire Thrower teams can do a lot of damage when they suddenly appear, 3.1 inches off your line. The disadvantage to that is that, like, you're literally starting on the board with, like, an Arch-Warlock and an Engineer and a Warp Lightning Cannon. And that Warp Lightning Cannon can't even use its ability out of there in the first turn because it's a 24-inch range. And your ability is you get to make it free fire in the hero phase, which is cool, though it very easily takes damage when it does that. Like on a, basically it's got almost basically a 50-50 shot of taking a bunch of mortal wounds. But it's a straight trade in cost. Okay. For some degree or another. So it can be a 6 of one, half a dozen of another situation. So, I am not as big of a fan of that one, because you lose any kind of number of bodies. I like having the little acolytes, even though they're worthless. They're so low priority in this list, and there's still 10 little bodies that can march around and sit on stuff. I like having wind mortars around, even if it's only one of them. It all still can amount to a 1-drop list, but I just want to point out to people that there are different ways to build this, and this is my personal taste for it, but your mileage may vary.
I'm highly impressed about the fact that it's a 1-drop list, because with the changes in the GHB 17, the 1-drop lists have become so much fewer. Not just because of the fact that that the battalions themselves are increased in cost, but that the mega battalions, you tend to get priced out because of the mounting cost of all of them individually. You have 3 battalions here. You're spending 300 points, and you may lose a little bit in terms of you don't have one major horde here to try to outnumber your opponent, but there's so much here that's going to whittle down your opponent quickly. I don't think it's going to matter. It's pretty interesting. How have you played this a lot? I mean, what? I
do not play this list. This is Theorycraft. I on this list. The first list is what I tend to play.
Okay,
it's a little softer. This isn't. Okay. Look, here's what I'll say to people. If you're playing in like some kind of hard edge tournament where people expect this kind of behavior, fine, have a good time and go nuts with it. But I'll be honest, man, if you're playing in a friendly game, like, don't just take like a list like this to your local store, because against hyper-tuned lists, there's a lot of lists. This will just beat first turn. Right. In the hero, in basically the hero phase of the first turn, you've won.
Yes.
And that is really, really just a garbage experience for your opponent. And if you're playing somebody new or somebody who doesn't know what to expect this, and I would never play this list without explaining before I ever started exactly what it's capable of for my opponent. Do not try to win by surprising people. Okay.
Right. But I don't know if you run into this. I run into this all the time. People say, bring your best, or they want the shit kicker list. They want to face the crazy of the crazy. And I bring it. I usually do, but I warn them. I'm like, are you really sure? And then they learn that, and they understand, and that they ask for it. But if somebody's, or if you're in a local group where everybody's trying to do the crazy, that's great. Then you can be comfortable. You're familiar with everybody. But somebody new, you don't want to bring the kick you in your teeth list to anybody that you don't have you'll never play that person again. And right. you might even have them quit the hobby.
Right. And so, you're not wrong. And what especially for a very new person. What I'd say is, if I was going to play this list, I would absolutely explain its full capabilities to people before the match. Winning on not explaining how your list works is very bad. That's dirty pool. Explain what you can do and let your opponent try to react smartly to it. So they can deploy accordingly or whatever. You're still very likely to win the turn choice. You still have a lot of control. Don't try to win by hiding things. Play open list. Just tell people how you work and let it be, and let the chips fall. Because if you don't, there are really lists that this will just roll first turn.
Yeah, and I saw somebody move,
and that's not fun.
I saw somebody move from AOS back to 40K after getting steamrolled at a local shop, not by me, but I thought it was a foul experience as a new player looking to walk in, and I felt terrible. And I actually had a conversation with the guy, but this was before points too, so there was a lot of shenanigans there too. But then, however that experience goes down, you're not doing the hobbyist service, and there's just one less player that you're going to be able to have fun with down the road. I mean, yeah.
Exactly. Don't don't sacrifice a future regular opponent for one win, one game. That's just stupid.
Then you'll be that guy. All right.
So, but there you go. Those are the 3 lists.
Excellent. So let me go ahead and unshare. Let's see here. All right, there we go. All right, so that was awesome. Any other comments or viewpoints about Skaven in general, for not just the average player, but even for competitive folk?
I mean, Skaven are an incredibly varied list. They have a lot of different capabilities. There's a lot of interesting, viable Skaven lists. As I mentioned, we haven't even touched on Clan Pestilence yet, which has its own entire ecosystem around like what it can do. My advice is have fun with them. Expect that things are going to go wrong. Don't get upset at your models or at the game when things don't go your way. You will have bad games with them where luck turns against you, where with your weapon teams you go to extend the range or do the extra damage and suddenly like things blow up. It can and will happen, and that's okay. That's just life. Steer into it. Accept the chaos as part of the fun of playing the army. I mean, if you wanted to play something boring, you could go play Corn. Like that's fine.
That's a shot across the bow.
So there you go. You could go play one of the lesser Chaos Gods if you wanted something boring. There you go.
More so. All right. Thank you, Vince. Once again, we're going to do part 2 with just plain Pestilence, just plain Pestilence. For the next time we have you on, always a pleasure to have you on, and great insight. Keep an eye out for obviously for Vince's topic of the week. I'm sure we're going to see one sometime today, as well as. And you want to give us a little foreshadowing, or you want to keep that under your close to the vest?
I'll keep it under the hat.
All right, you got it. So get your responses prepared for that one, and of course every Wednesday for Warhammer Wednesdays on Warhammer Weekly. Vince and Tom, the staple of the middle of the week during the Hump Day, and have a great day, everybody.